Love Knows No Boundaries by dangodangomilk. Akutagawa isn't a fan of socializing. He's not shy and actually opts for voicing his personal thoughts loudly by stabbing someone with Roshomon's tendrils. But whenever the Port Mafia are engaged in events that require proper social skills, he tends to stay out of it. He much prefers thrilling missions that involve fighting and life-and-death situations, which give him great chances to improve his ability. Chuya's high-ranking executive position and his title as one of the halves of the infamous Double Black, alongside Dazai, make him Akutagawa's superior. The two of them have completely no reason to interact outside of the Mafia. Despite that, Chuya enjoys spending time and getting to know the lives of his subordinates. He probably has even his lowest-ranking grunt's name memorized. Unfortunately for Akutagawa, that means that even he can't escape Chuya's prying clutches to lure him out into spending a night at the nearby bar drinking expensive wine. What makes it even worse is that he isn't allowed to make excuses, and stabbing Chuya with his ability is definitely not a smart idea. Not only would Chuya kill him, Dazai would certainly never forgive him for it. So far, he's managed to escape most of the bar trip offers from his redhead superior. He's heard stories from Hirotsu and Kaji about how terrifying Chuya becomes when he gets drunk. It usually involves Chuya complaining about the massive workload Mori assigns him, or cursing Dazai's head off for simply existing in this world. Akutagawa had once found it odd that even though Chuya and Dazai had been married for several years now, Chuya still acts like they're enemies. By now, he's already grasped the idea that this is the way Chuya expresses his love for his husband, as weird as it may be. On a fine afternoon, Akutagawa's head finally clears when he returns from a successful mission. The hem of his coat is stained with drying blood, and he's sporting a new scar on the side of his cheek, but overall he feels at peace, satisfied at how the mission turned out. He's so calm he doesn't even bother telling Higuchi to shut up when she frets over the possibilities of him getting hurt. He eventually sends Higuchi away, dismissing her protests while he seeks peaceful solidarity away in his office. After years of working in this field, he's grown to understand why Dazai preferred spending his time alone in his office during his dark days in the Mafia, when neither Chuya nor his companions from Bar Lupin were free to accompany him. It feels nice. When Akutagawa opens the door to his office, a gust of cold wind hits him. That's unsurprising. His office in the middle of the Mafia has always felt unnecessarily chilly. Shutting the door behind him, he approaches his pompous desk and immediately scowls when he catches sight of the undone paperwork, sitting innocently on top of it. Back when he'd agreed to Dazai's offer of joining the Port Mafia, he initially did not anticipate the amount of paperwork he'd have to deal with. Fighting and killing were entirely within his expectations, which is rather disturbing for a young teenager who just wanted to survive at the time. But throughout the years he'd spent in the Port Mafia, his love for doing paperwork did not grow 1 inch. His hatred for it sure did, though. He settles down on his chair, nose scrunching at how unfamiliar it feels, given that he doesn't spend much time in his office anyway, hence why it's probably so eerie and cold all the time. The only people he's ever allowed to enter his office are himself, Higuchi, the Black Lizard, and the executives. Picking up the pen already has Akutagawa bored out of his mind, and staring at the paperwork fuels his temptation to tear it all into a million shreds. He exhales, several times closing his eyes. Akutagawa is in his mid-20s, and he firmly believes he's no longer the pitiful kid Dazai found in those woods many years ago. And he's already snapped out of the unhealthy mindset that he is nothing more than a mindless killing machine enslaved to the Port Mafia. To put it simply, Akutagawa has been through a lot. Completing paperwork shouldn't be much of a problem for him. Higuchi has usually offered to handle those for him, but now that these are already on his desk, he doesn't feel the need to call for his blonde subordinate, when he's just sent her away. With a sigh, he leans back against the admittedly uncomfortable chair to pull out one of the drawers where he's previously secured all of his files, although they most likely haven't been touched in ages since he stored them in here. He grabs the file he needs, cringing at how much dust there is, and nearly triggers a coughing fit from him when something else in the drawer grabs his attention. A copy of his wedding certificate. Akutagawa's chest suddenly feels warm. He shakes his head, grumbling incoherently when he's hit with the reminder that his paperwork is still unfinished, and smiling dreamily in his office like an idiot for even a second is not going to speed up his work process. Oddly enough, he doesn't remember leaving his wedding certificate of all things in the specific drawer, filled with files and reports about work. As cruel of a man as he may be, he would still have the decency to not leave his wedding certificate to gather dust in his office drawer. Perhaps his memory is failing him, which automatically puts him in a sour mood, because if his memory is gradually deteriorating due to some eventually unsurprising reason, that means he won't be able to be at his best condition while working in the Mafia. With a sigh, Akutagawa makes a mental note to bring the certificate back home with him later, after he's done finishing a stack of paperwork. Speak of the devil, just 2 days later, Akutagawa is called to see Chuya. He had been ready to reject the request at once upon hearing it, but when he weighs his options and contemplates whether he's truly skilled enough to run from Chuya, he eventually resigns himself to his fate and drags his feet over to the executive's office. He isn't the slightest bit surprised when the first thing he sees after entering the office is Chuya leaning against his desk, holding what is definitely a wine glass in his hand. Akutagawa quickly sweeps his gaze over Chuya's office for a moment, instantly noting the photo frame placed on the side of Chuya's desk. He's almost positive there's an identical one sitting on Dazai's desk at the detective agency. Shifting his gaze onto his superior, Akutagawa bows. "Chuya-san," he greets, a frown already making its way onto his lips. "Is this about any of my missions?" "What? No." Chuya denies at once, rolling his eyes at the fact that that's the first thing Akutagawa is concerned about. "Your missions have all been successful, Akutagawa, but that's not the reason I called you here." The frown in Akutagawa's face deepens, heart immediately sinking in horror. "If this is about the bar invites, I'm afraid I'll have to decline." "It's not about the bar trips." Chuya cuts him off, sighing, and takes another sip of his wine. "Jesus. If you dislike the bar and wine so much that you can just say so like this, stop running off to who knows where when I invite you out. You're acting like I'm plotting your demise or something." Akutagawa recalls the gossip he heard from within the Mafia. The horrified look on Kaji's face when he asked about it. The face of the man who'd seen it all, his life flashing in front of his eyes, Hirotsu. Most of the Mafia associated with Hirotsu firmly believe that the man is wise and stoic all the time because he's had to deal with so much bullshit after serving the Port Mafia for most of his life. The bullshit being in the form of teenage double black. Hirotsu's stress level and blood pressure have noticeably went down after Dazai defected. "One of your subordinates. She mentioned something about you that caught my interest," Chuya began, looking nervous, suddenly. If his words had been totally out of context, if this conversation were ever to spread to Dazai's ears, then Akutagawa knows his former mentor would be after his head. "The short blonde one that always hangs around you. What's her name again?" "Higuchi." Chuya snaps his fingers in realization. "Yeah, her." He continues. "She let slip something about you." Akutagawa twitches. and he suddenly has an inkling that he'll be giving Higuchi an earful later. What? The executive now looks uncomfortable, like he can't trust the words about to leave his mouth. Akutagawa, you... He goes on, face turning slightly red in a way Akutagawa is thankful Dazai is no longer in the Mafia to witness such a scenario, and make his life hell for even looking at Chuya like this. Are you married? The mental image in his head of Dazai threatening to murder him for even laying his eyes on Chuya, like some shoujo manga, fades as he returns to reality. Akutagawa blinks, abruptly dumbfounded by Chuya's sudden question. What? Are you married, Akutagawa? Chuya repeats with the serious tone and expression he usually uses during an important meeting, where his title as the Port Mafia executive shines. Right now, within the four walls of Chuya's lavish office, the situation right now is so awkward it's almost funny. Even Akutagawa is stunned for a few long seconds. Why are you suddenly asking me this? Is what he ends up responding with, giving Chuya an odd look. He already knows the man likes to be well informed about his subordinates, but he had no idea that involved knowing about their love life and if they're already married. Higuchi was in your office a few days ago, Chuya explains. When she came out, she said something about your wedding certificate? Akutagawa's fists clench, eyes squeezing shut. That explains the misplaced wedding certificate. He's starting to think if he needs to set up a few regulations in his office, specially made for Higuchi. Chuya clears his throat, which snaps Akutagawa out of his little trance to see that the executive is still waiting for his response, impatiently. I'm married, Akutagawa admits. It's not a big deal, so I don't... The wine glass in Chuya's hand shatters from his sheer grip. Surprised for a few seconds, Akutagawa schools his expression back to neutral, also noting that the wine glass was thankfully already empty when Chuya broke it. You're married? Chuya's blue eyes are wide like dinner plates. What the fuck? Are you for real? Do I ever joke, Chuya-san? Akutagawa remarks blandly. I mean no, but this isn't some joke? Chuya mutters. I thought I must have been hearing things when Higuchi said that. Chuya-san, I got married like a year ago. Akutagawa sighs, feeling relieved that his conversation did not involve his work, but also rather disturbed because his marriage has never been a topic he brought up in the Mafia's headquarters. I thought you knew. No, I fucking did not, Chuya shouts. He's designed his personal office as soundproof ever since Koyu complained about the loud noises coming from his office when Dazai was still around to pick fights with him. It's so advanced that he could yell in Akutagawa's face all he wants and no one outside could even hear. You married? I'm pretty sure no one else in the Mafia is aware of that. Akutagawa nods in agreement. I've never mentioned it, after all. Why not? It's nothing related to my work. Akutagawa bites his lip as Chuya narrows his eyes. But I never tried to hide it, either, though. He defends himself. Chuya arches an eyebrow, unconvinced and unimpressed. Akutagawa's mood worsens even more when he realizes this exact scenario could be played out with an upset mother and her guilty child. It's just so hard to believe, Chuya comments, crossing his arms as he looks Akutagawa down, then makes a face like he's reminiscing something. That you, out of all people, would be married to someone. I could say the same thing for you and Dazai-san. Shut up, we don't talk about him here, Chuya snaps, and Akutagawa is once again wondering why and how his two superiors even got married in the first place, if Chuya still talks like he's some unwanted fugitive and his biggest enemy. But everyone would probably freak out if they heard you're married. You're right, Akutagawa agrees, but I'm not ashamed of my marriage. Who the hell would marry you anyway? Chuya asks out of the blue, laughing. I'm curious as to who would have enough patience to tame someone as wild as you. Please stop referring to me like a dog, Akutagawa says. As for my spouse, the most beautiful face Akutagawa has ever seen appears in his mind. He automatically begins smiling. In the background, there's Chuya choking on his saliva. You're smiling, what the fuck? He coughs. Who the fuck is it? Straightening his posture, Akutagawa bows his head once more and takes a few steps backwards towards the exit. I'd like to keep that piece of information private for now, Chuya-san. He explains briefly before escaping from the office at a godlike speed in case Chuya rages and decides to go after him. If Akutagawa had known what he told Chuya at the time would eventually arise to utter chaos within the Mafia, he would have confessed everything in the first place without complaint. Akutagawa unwillingly learns a new thing about his red-headed superior. Chuya is a huge gossip snob. Within 3 days after their conversation in Chuya's office, Akutagawa is taken aback that Chuya did not chase him down that day. Instead, he's faced with something even worse. Akutagawa-san, I know this is sudden, but one of the Black Lizard's commanders, Tachihara, asks, rubbing his nape nervously, Are you really married? His first instinct is to activate Rashomon and stab Tachihara, comrade or not. That's what he's always done when he finds himself too caught off guard to properly answer a question. Regardless, he does not in fact activate his ability and kill the poor assassination group commander. He knows that if he kills a member of the Mafia, he'll be sentenced with treason. He's grown to be way more composed than that. Who told you that? Tachihara immediately tenses, and Akutagawa realizes he struck something that Tachihara wishes he didn't ask. Akutagawa narrows his eyes down at him, morphing his cool expression into a glare. Tachihara, he warns slowly. Tachihara takes a few steps back on reflex, a habit the redhead sadly has picked up whenever Akutagawa uses that tone with him, particularly when he gets too close to Jin. He raises his hand up in surrender. Higuchi-ni-san said it, he explains hastily. At least that's what Chuya-san told me. Chuya-san? Akutagawa doesn't know if he should be surprised. On one hand, he didn't think Chuya would spread something like this. But frankly, he's not really bothered about it because, like he told Chuya, he isn't ashamed of his marriage. In fact, he'd never been happier. I was at the bar with him yesterday, and he was complaining about you running away again, Tachihara says, also a fellow victim to Chuya's admitted frequent bar trips with his subordinates. And he kept going on and on that he still doesn't believe you're really married. To be honest, I don't quite believe it either. I personally told Chuya-san about my marriage a few days ago, Akutagawa says with a steel expression. Are you questioning my honesty? What? No, it's not about that. Tachihara sighs deeply. Looking at your reputation, most people wouldn't think you were married, even if you screamed it in their faces anyway. Akutagawa doesn't start an argument, despite how much he personally disagrees with that. If he was still 18, then maybe he would agree with Tachihara's statement, but after years of reaching adulthood, he learns to understand something. People change. It's what Higuchi said Dazai told her, and Jin during a mission years ago, during their conflict with the guild. Akutagawa had initially thought it was nonsense, but seeing Dazai now, so different from when he was under the Port Mafia, he can't help but slightly agree with it. He's fairly certain that his previous mindset wouldn't have changed if it weren't for his current spouse's help. If they hadn't met, Akutagawa might have spiraled down a very dark path by now. His partner is part of the reason why he and Dazai are even getting a chance to mend their formal unsteady mentor-student relationship. Akutagawa-san, I know you might not want to answer this, but... Tachihara pipes up anxiously. Who are you married to? Akutagawa releases a sigh. Is this really necessary? He looks around, observing their surroundings. I wouldn't say this is a suitable place to discuss issues regarding my private life. He frowns. I also do not wish to talk about my partner here. They're surrounded by dead bodies. Standing behind them, a row of men are either looking very uncomfortable or very intrigued by their conversation. Maybe right after a mission wasn't the best time to ask you about this, Tachihara mutters under his breath, fiddling with his gun. Akutagawa rolls his eyes, turning around to walk away, without even bothering to answer Tachihara's question. He truly did underestimate Chuya too much. Akutagawa already thinks rather highly of the gravity-manipulating ability user. But that's when it comes to his skills, not his capability to spread gossip within the Port Mafia like wildfire. Sometimes he really does hate how Chuya is so good at socializing and has so many friends who share their equal love for gossiping. Considering the Port Mafia's reputation, ridiculous rumors circling the members are common occurrences. Akutagawa is married, unfortunately now tops this week's list as the most interesting gossip the Mafia has heard all year. Higuchi isn't heartbroken easily ranks as a close second. There aren't many people who are aware of Akutagawa's marriage. Therefore, most of the mafioso who hear of the gossip immediately respond with a similar shocked reaction. The only ones who aren't fazed by it too much seem to be Jin and Higuchi. Jin is out of the question because she's Akutagawa's sister, but to say even Koyu is surprised when she discovers that Higuchi did not shed a single tear at the mention of the latest gossip. I'm Akutagawa-senpai's most faithful subordinate, Higuchi proudly proclaims, when the other mafiosos suspiciously question her about it, wondering if she's secretly hiding her despair and misery behind a facade. How could I not be aware of his marriage? After all, Akutagawa-senpai has been so happy ever since, and his happiness is my happiness. Happy, Tachihara says, wrinkling his nose. He doesn't seem any different to me. Jean shakes her head. He's been happier lately, she comments, immediately flushing red at her delicate, sweet voice, but does not hesitate twice to unsheath her knife when Tachihara snorts at her. I'll still need some time to process this, including the fact that you're actually not crying over this right now. Tachihara mumbles, glancing at Higuchi. But forget that, who's he married to anyway? Higuchi tilts her head. You don't know, she says incredulously, blonde strands falling in front of her face. Tachihara, you're so oblivious. Well, excuse me for not being a stalker and observing Akutagawa-san's every move. Tachihara retorts. Who is it? He's a member of the armed detective agency, Higuchi replies, clicking her tongue. Satisfied? You didn't even give me a name, Tachihara deadpans, leaning back against his chair. The detective agency, let's see, who and Akutagawa-san would make a good pairing, he mumbles to himself, furrowing his eyebrows. Doesn't he only ever talk about Dazai-san, then? Are you stupid? Higuchi and Jin say at the same time, glaring at Tachihara with a force that, unfortunately, still can't even rival Chuya's eagle-eyed death stare. Tachihara swallows, suddenly feeling cold. Sorry, he apologizes to no one in particular. Well, then all that's left is the were-tiger. He wouldn't shut up about a few years back. Higuchi shrugs. Now you've got your answer. Tachihara looks over at her. What? He says blankly. stares for a few minutes before turning to Jean. Are you serious? When none of the girls answer him, Tachihara lets out a loud gasp. One would think he'd be having a seizure at that moment. The assassin wheezes, nearly toppling over his chair. Oh my god! He murmurs over and over, slipping off his chair eventually to walk away, massaging his temples as he does so. Once he's gone, Jean turns to stare at Gucci. You're not going to tell him that you cried for 3 straight days when you first heard the news? She teases. Nissan. The blonde's cheeks quickly heat up, head hanging in shame and embarrassment. Let's not talk about that ever again, please. Annoyingly enough for Akutagawa, Tachihara takes after his superior Chuya in certain aspects he does not really appreciate. For example, their habit of spreading gossip. Jesus Christ. Akutagawa seriously wants to question if the Port Mafia is filled with dangerous fighters and powerful ability users or just a bunch of useless, gossip-loving aunties. If the word gets out, their reputation will be doomed for. Right now, Akutagawa is reluctantly sitting at a bar. This time, Chuya didn't even bother to use the word invite, but instead threatened him into coming. And since Akutagawa very much wants to live so he can go home to his very lovely partner, he relents. Fuck you, Akutagawa, Chuya tells him, slamming a glass of wine on the table so hard it's a miracle the entire thing doesn't break. Beside him, Hirotsu wears a familiar frown on his face, but otherwise doesn't look surprised by Chuya's actions. You're married to one of those goody two-shoes from the goddamn detective agency? Chuya groans, burying his face in his palms. Why, Akutagawa? Why did you give in? I thought you were stronger than that. Akutagawa has a feeling that it's a reference to Chuya's own relationship and unfortunate marriage with Dazai, so he winces. I don't know why myself, Chuya-san, he admits, frowning. The Port Mafia is doomed, Chuya sighs, moving to order one more drink, glaring at Kaji when he makes a snarky comment about his low alcohol tolerance. Piss off. I want to get shit-faced drunk tonight and none of you fuckers are gonna stop me. Hirotsu raises an eyebrow as he watches Chuya recklessly down another glass of wine the bartender hands him. Shall we perhaps prepare to make a phone call to Dazai-kun later? He suggests. Akutagawa nods. Dazai-san will kill us if he finds out we left Chuya-san extremely drunk and alone in a bar, he states. Kaji hums. You're right. He chuckles maniacally, glancing at Akutagawa with amusement. Congrats on your marriage, Akutagawa. I got married more than a year ago, Akutagawa mutters. It isn't a big deal, really. Chuya huffs. You're probably the only one who thinks that, he says, voice slightly slurred, like he's already on the verge of getting drunk. He slides a glass of wine over to Akutagawa. Have a drink, will you? I can't drink. Akutagawa declines the offer, even though Chuya doesn't seem to notice, cheeks flushed and clearly already drunk. Akutagawa quickly gets off his seat, ready to exit the bar because he knows when Chuya gets drunk, that's when all the trouble starts. Akutagawa should have known. He's headed his way to Mori's office on the top floor of the Port Mafia headquarters, already having an idea as to what's the reason. His assumption is further confirmed when Koyu exits Mori's office, sees him, grins, then congratulates his marriage and goes on her merry way. He has been watching Mori attempt to suck up to a sulking Elise for 10 minutes now, which is nothing much. He's heard the executives have it the worst since they see the boss almost on a daily basis. Chuya once complained about it at the bar, that he had to watch the two bicker about a dress for nearly 2 hours. Elise hurls a frilly pink dress in Mori's direction, smacking the clothing square directly on the mafia boss's face before storming out of the office with a loud slam of the door, obviously throwing a tantrum. Mori doesn't even seem the least bit irritated, merely sighs dreamily at Elise's antics. Ah, Akutagawa. Mori turns to face him, grinning. He steeples his fingers under his chin, a glint shining in his violet eyes. Thank you for coming on such short notice. You're the boss. Akutagawa bows his head in respect. It's my job. Mori chuckles. I'm sure you understand why I called you here. Akutagawa does have a good idea, but he's been trying to deny it ever since he was called to Mori's office. Is this one about one of my missions? He tries. The boss looks amused. Of course not, he replies, twirling a scalpel between his gloved fingers. I'm assuming you know about the rumors as well. Dread instantly fills Akutagawa, instantly knowing which direction this conversation is steering to. Yes, boss. I need advice, Akutagawa, Mori says, and that is definitely not what Akutagawa expected to hear. How did you do it? Do what? Attract his attention. Get him to notice you. Get married to him in general. Mori explains seriously, his gaze boring into Akutagawa's. Explain every detail to me carefully. Akutagawa blinks, bewildered. What he's certain of is that no way is he going to describe his love story to Mori out of all people. I think this question would be better suited for Chuuya-san to answer. He attempts to persuade his way out of the conversation, then run at full speed away from the office. Mori looks at him. Do you really think so? He challenges. Akutagawa looks defeated. No, he sighs, cursed with the inability to tell lies to anyone. Akutagawa, hear me out, Mori continues, eyes softening. I think I have a thing for people who wield swords. And not for little girls anymore, that's a surprise. A wave of disgust washes over Akutagawa when the realization dawns on him that he knows who the sword-wielding man Mori has a crush on, like some high school girl. He glances at the huge window behind Mori, then develops a sudden urge to immediately jump out of it and accept his fate. He'd rather do that than stay here any longer. Perhaps he's more like to Dazai than he thinks. Maybe his former mentor did rub off on him a bit. Akutagawa. Mori's voice is stern and firm, like he's not accepting no for an answer. Akutagawa is aware he could just stab Mori with Rashomon and be done with it like how he handles his other predicaments, but doing that will easily cost him his life. And so, to Akutagawa's utter dismay, he spends the next hour standing in front of Mori's desk, listening to his rambles regarding a certain detective agency's president, and occasionally giving advice when asked. The Port Mafia's infamous rabid dog, reduced to a mockery of love, guru giving stupid love advice to a dangerous mafia boss. If only Dazai could see me and notice my strength now. Akutagawa grumbles after he's finally allowed to leave the office, feeling more embarrassed than he'd ever been before in more than 20 years of living. Regardless of some of the stuff Akutagawa has said in the last few days to other members of the Port Mafia, he sort of gets why most of them have been suspicious of the statement and didn't believe it until he further confirmed it for them. His title as the heartless rabid dog of the Mafia does not give any justice. Mori had mentioned more than once that he himself couldn't see Akutagawa genuinely caring or loving anyone besides Jean. Akutagawa did not reply at that time, but he knew he was right. If the gossip of his marriage reaches the ears of their enemies, he suspects a lot of them would be quite taken aback. It's rare for someone to associate Akutagawa Ryunosuke with something so normal as love. Pay attention, Akutagawa, Chuya barks, thus snapping him out of his train of thoughts. Behind him, Koyu hides her amused smile behind her sleeve before walking away, a group of men in the back tailing after her. This isn't any time to chicken out. Akutagawa huffs, shoving his freezing hands into his pockets. I always pay attention, he protests, and since when have I ever chickened out? You don't, Chuya mutters, glaring up at him with sharp azure eyes. but you've got the terrible habit of pushing yourself to your limits even when your body is physically giving out. He pauses, glancing to the side. And we can only blame that on one person. He says slowly, like he's anticipating something to happen. Chuya! A familiar, energetic voice beams from afar. Dazai practically pounces onto Chuya's back, and as strong as Chuya may be, he doesn't expect a sudden weight nonetheless, and the married couple almost tumble to the ground like idiots, all while Chuya is swearing non-stop. Akutagawa mentally jots down the fact that after years of being together, Chuya can even detect Dazai's presence from afar. That's amazing. He's suddenly regretting ever giving in to Mori and thinks he should have persuaded his boss into asking Chuya for relationship advice instead. Chuya's advice surely must be more efficient. Speak of the fucking devil. Chuya grunts, lifting his head up to send Dazai a menacing glare, one that Dazai doesn't even bat an eye at. Why are you here? Dazai grins widely, draping an arm around Chuya's shoulders. The shorter male protests, but otherwise does not make a move to push Dazai off. The agency are out celebrating our 10,500th accomplished case at a nearby restaurant, he explains. Although, a huge quarter of those cases are courtesy to Rampo-san's skills. Dazai-san, Kunikita's raging voice booms from the other side of the street. We leave you alone for 1 second and you've already found someone to annoy. Kunikita-kun, how dare you? Chuya isn't just any someone, Dazai whines, leaning in to smooch Chuya, but ending up getting rejected when the redhead shoves him away, yelling at him to spend time with his fellow agency co-workers instead and to stop acting like a nuisance. Akutagawa doesn't really bother to hear the rest. According to Dazai, the agency members are all out together, and if Dazai's here, then that means... A sudden hand wraps around his wrist, gently moving it out of his pocket, and then warm fingers intertwine with his own cold ones. He doesn't even need to think twice to figure out who the other hand belongs to. He recognizes it at once, considering he's held it so many times before. It still doesn't stop his mind from going blank. Akutagawa turns his head to the side, locking gazes with a pair of purple and yellow eyes. Hey, Akutagawa says, briefly looking down at their entwined fingers. He hears the other male laugh, which causes his heart to skip a beat. He adores that angelic sound. Hey yourself, Atsushi responds, offering Akutagawa a smile wide enough to split his cheekbones. The were-tiger squeezes their hands, chuckling. Your hands are always so cold, Ryu. I thought you said you wouldn't call me that in public. Atsushi rolls his eyes. Let me have this. I don't expect you to call me were-tiger right now, would you? Akutagawa arches an eyebrow in challenge. What if I would? Then I'm gonna punch you in the face, Atsushi responds. Renosuke. Exhaling a sigh, Akutagawa gives in just this once. Atsushi, he says, a frown inching onto his lips when the younger male abruptly bursts into a fit of laughter. I'm not laughing at you, Atsushi immediately denies, clearly showing off the fact that he can read Akutagawa's mind. I was just thinking that you look really cute right now. Watching the scowl on Akutagawa's pale face, Atsushi only guffaws harder. Despite Akutagawa's sour expression, neither of them even think of separating their laced fingers. Is Kyoko around? I don't want her here to witness you even saying that about me, Akutagawa says, looking around in search of the petite, dark-haired girl. Atsushi shakes his head. She went off somewhere with Yoshino, sensei. Is your subordinate Higuchi with you? I don't want her to be here to see you blush. I'm afraid she might start crying over you again. What? I do not blush. Nakajima Atsushi, take that back. He doesn't get a chance to finish his sentence as Atsushi leans over and presses their lips together. It's so natural, Akutagawa kisses back immediately. Doesn't even flinch when the younger male's free hand settles on his waist, while the other one remains intertwined with Akutagawa's. When they pull away, Neither of them acknowledged Dazai's teasing comments or Chuya scolding them for getting carried away. In fact, after all the shit Akutagawa has been through in the last few days, he even moves closer to Atsushi out of spite. "I'm on my way to a mission, actually," Akutagawa informs once they finally pull away. "Surely the great Renosuke can wait a few more minutes. I know you like being punctual, but you should indulge your poor husband once in a while," Atsushi says. "Chuya-san will—" "You seriously think Dazai-san will let Chuya-san go anytime soon?" Akutagawa can't argue with that. "I hate that you're right for once, Were-Tiger." "I'm always right," Atsushi murmurs, slightly irritated. "And I told you to stop calling me that. You aren't 20 and I'm not 18 anymore." The nickname stuck, Akutagawa says, taking his time to study Atsushi's features closely. "But I much prefer calling you Atsushi too." "If you prefer that, then why don't you?" Atsushi cuts himself off to pinch the bridge of his nose. "You're unbearable sometimes." "That's my charm," Akutagawa claims. "We've been married for over a year. Surely it'd be a bit stupid to still be bickering over nicknames," Atsushi snorts. "Although I heard that your colleagues at the Port Mafia only just recently found out." "How do you know that?" "Chuya-san told Dazai-san, and obviously he spread it around the office," the Were-Tiger says, laughing softly at the memory. "I couldn't stop laughing when I heard." "Chuya-san and Dazai-san are bigger gossip snobs than I thought." "That's what makes them perfect for each other," Atsushi whispers. "Could say the same for you and I. Love you, Ryu." Akutagawa doesn't expect that sudden confession, but he wholeheartedly welcomes it. "I love you too," he answers. "I also have a mission to complete." Atsushi grins, tucking his strands of hair behind his ear. "Better get going then. Make sure you don't fail." "I never fail," Akutagawa states, "but I will need some help on untangling Chuya-san from Dazai-san so we can go on our mission." Atsushi doesn't voice that he automatically feels happy when he sees Akutagawa getting more and more comfortable asking for help, rather than suffering the burden all by himself, but he smiles nevertheless. "You're on your own. I don't want to get killed by either of them." Akutagawa sighs heavily, troubled by his current problem, but feels content when Atsushi continues laughing loudly. He stares at their conjoined hands, thanking the gods above that a being as perfect as Nakajima Atsushi chose him, out of all people, to be by his side. Their marriage would no doubt last for many, many more years to come. Akutagawa would make sure of that. He's sure Atsushi thinks the same as well. "No, I fucking did not!" Chuya shouts. He's designed his personal office as soundproof ever since Koyu complained about the loud noises. Oh my god. No, wait, it's from fights. It's from fights. That's what it says. It's from when he...